I have an idea that's so crazy, it might just be true. Let's talk about Kang the Conqueror and Immortus for a second. A lot of people are confused about this. Kang the Conqueror and Immortus, who are basically the same person, yet somehow two distinctly different people. Let's use Captain America Steve Rogers as a way to explain how these two characters function. So we know the timeline of Steve Rogers, right? Steve Rogers was a really scrawny kid in the 1930s that he always wanted to enlist as a soldier in World War II. He was eventually given the super soldier serum, blasted with Vita rays. He fought during World War II, piloted a great big ship, and then was frozen in ice for 70 years. He was thawed out. Then he became a member of the Avengers. Then you fast forward to Avengers Endgame when he took the Infinity Stones and the Hammer of Thor back to where they were supposed to be, keeping the timeline intact, and then came back to the present day after having lived a life with Peggy Carter. Let's say he didn't. Let's say that in that time when he went back and lived a life with Peggy Carter, he created a name for himself. He started calling himself Tim, and he led a whole life as Tim, his whole life with Peggy Carter. That he had the idea that he was Steve Rogers, but ultimately looked at that as a previous life for himself. That's not his life anymore. He's not Captain America. He's not an Avenger. He's Tim, and he has a life with Peggy Carter, and he's doing whatever he's doing with Peggy Carter. And then when the time comes when she develops Alzheimer's and ultimately dies, instead of coming back to the modern era, he just lives out the rest of his days as Tim, and then eventually dies of old age with maybe children, grandchildren, whatever the case happens to be. That's how Immortus and Kang the Conqueror work. That technically, all these different characters who are out there, Iron Lad, Immortus, Ramatut, they're all based off the character of Kang the Conqueror, who went back in time at different periods across the universe's history, and then they just kind of fashioned a life for themselves and live out that life as that particular person. Jonathan Majors is the guy who's supposed to play Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man and Wasp: Quantumania. If you saw Immortus, it'd be played by Jonathan Majors. Sure, they're the exact same person in terms of look, but in terms of personality and life experiences, they're completely different people. That's why you would have Immortus and Kang talking to each other as if they were different people, despite more or less being the same person. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about this crazy idea, because I felt like that needed to be explained, particularly with what we're going to talk about here. So in the episode 4 promo of Loki, you have Sylvie as a little girl. By all standards of measurement, it's her. There's no reason to believe that it's not her. Now, Sylvie as a little girl looks exactly the way that Loki would look. The big question you have to ask here is, why is Sylvie as a little girl being brought into the TVA? The Time Variance Authority exists to ensure that those individuals who become variants or deviate from the existing timeline are quote-unquote dealt with effectively. According to Mobius, they're killed, which indicates to us that Mobius doesn't actually know what happens to them, because we know by virtue of Sylvie, assuming that she's telling the truth, that they're turned into members of the TVA, and they just go forward as agents, having their minds wiped and new memories put in their place. So Sylvie would likely have been turned into a TVA agent for whatever reason that happened to be. My bet is she's not supposed to exist, but there could be something bigger at play here. So let's say that Sylvie is turned into a TVA agent, she exists as an agent, and then does whatever it is that TVA agents do, depending on when she was part of the organization. Somewhere along the line, she went from Sylvie the TVA agent to Sylvie who hates TVA agents, specifically the TVA itself. Seems like she hates timekeepers, she wants to take the timekeepers out. We don't definitively know if that's the case, because she seems to have routinely said, this is not about the timekeepers, it's much bigger than that. My guess is the timekeepers are dead, with the exception of one. So my thought here is Sylvie was brought into the TVA because, as we know with Mobius talking to Loki, that variants are breakaways from a guaranteed outcome for a particular timeline. The sacred universe has a guaranteed beginning and a guaranteed end. And the whole goal of the TVA is to stop those alternate realities from coming into existence. A nexus event happens, an alternate reality branches off. When it reaches the red line, it is officially an alternate universe, and that alternate reality cannot be undone, hence the purpose behind the reset charge. I believe the theory that a lot of you guys have, that Kang the Conqueror is the one who's secretly running the show. That Kang the Conqueror and the Timekeepers engaged in a great big huge multiversal war, and Kang the Conqueror actually came out on top. That begs the question, what happened to the timekeepers? Are they totally destroyed? I would say all the timekeepers are dead except for one. That one timekeeper is alive, and that timekeeper comes in the form of Miss Munites. That Miss Munites is the missing timekeeper here. That they were all basically destroyed or eradicated or whatever the case was. And in the time where the timekeepers were being eliminated, one of them maybe backed up their memory in Miss Munites or whatever the case happens to be. So here's a real question you have to ask here in terms of why would a timekeeper pretend to be Miss Munites? Well, if we're talking about a timeline, right, an entire universal history, and Kang the Conqueror sits at the end of it and presumably knows how it's going to begin and how it's going to end, a timekeeper would be aware of that as well. They would know all the strengths and all the weaknesses of being in Kang the Conqueror's position. There'd be nowhere in the timeline they could possibly hide. Nowhere in the timeline where they could go that Kang the Conqueror couldn't find them. So what better alternative than to basically hide outside of time? Than to hide in a place where Kang the Conqueror doesn't know where they're going to be. He doesn't know the exact place that they're going to arrive. When you're at the very end of time and you know how the line's going to play out, all Kang the Conqueror would have to do is meet that timekeeper before they ever arrived in that particular location and then take them out. We know the time variance authority exists outside of time. They exist in null space, or at least supposedly null space. There's a big fan theory out there that they're actually existing in the quantum realm, and Kang the Conqueror is the one who rules the quantum realm. I don't know if that's definitively the case, but if it really is Kang, Immortus, what have you, who's running the show, there'd be no way they could hide in the time stream. So if they hide outside the time stream, the only place to do that is to either hide outside of the entirety of the multiverse itself, in which case they'd have no real ability to influence the end of Kang's entire rule, or they hide inside the time variance authority. More so than that, you hide in plain sight. You hide where nobody would expect you. You hide in the form of Miss Munites. And if this timekeeper knew, just by virtue of knowing the time stream, that Sylvie is a Nexus being, she'd be the perfect person to bring in, because in turn, she'd be able to create all kinds of chaos. We know that just by virtue of the statement that was made, that the universe wants to break free. The universe creates chaos, people like me. So I don't know if that's definitively the case. It could just be that it's one of these things where Sylvie just kind of exists. But Miss Munites is the reason why Sylvie went from being a TVA agent, presumably as a little kid, to becoming the Sylvie that we know now, in the sense that Miss Munites basically woke her up. Now the question is, why? What would be the point? What would be the reason for doing that? Why Sylvie in particular? Because I think that if the timeline is a guaranteed outcome and the sacred timeline is predicated on the idea that that's seemingly the only universe or the only timeline where Kang the Conqueror actually was victorious, and in all the other alternate realities he was basically defeated, in the same capacity as Doctor Strange looking at alternate universes, and only one of them was where Thanos was defeated when Iron Man died, that Kang the Conqueror is seeking to keep that as the singular universe out there, so he never has to worry about the other timekeepers or any of the timekeepers returning into existence if any of those alternate realities would exist. And I think Sylvie is basically a Nexus being, a person who could alter the entire timeline itself. Bringing her in and making her a TVA agent keeps that from happening, because now she's not supposed to know what her true purpose is. She would just go forward as a mindless TVA agent doing whatever it is a judge tells her to do, because the judge works for Kang the Conqueror. The judge is the one who keeps everything intact and everything controlled at the whims of Kang the Conqueror himself. But Miss Munites, as the last remaining timekeeper, became aware of this and realized what Sylvie was. Woke her up, told her what was actually happening. Sylvie, in turn, led a campaign against the entirety of the TVA, specifically against Kang, trying to create new alternate realities. Each time she tried, the TVA stepped in and they used reset chargers to bring them to an end. The only way to really do this was to go back in time or to use the reset chargers and send them across all these different places across the time stream and essentially create more timelines than the TVA could possibly keep up with. Creating all of these alternate realities, regardless of which reality it happens to be, would lead to the timekeepers effectively returning, and in turn, taking out Kang the Conqueror, or at least intending to take him out. Honestly, I don't know if we'll definitively see that happen. I think the main villain is gonna be the judge, and I think that's how it's all gonna play out. It's gonna come down to them, she's gonna be defeated, and much like what you saw with Agatha Harkness in WandaVision, it's gonna be one of those, you have no idea what you've unleashed kind of situations. And then we'll see it all sort of come to fruition in Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Now, having said all that, there are huge holes in this theory. So here's what I want from you guys down in the comment section. I want you guys to punch a hole, punch every single conceivable hole you can think of, counter every single point I made here. I would love to see you guys do that. It would be awesome. I'll go through your comments and I'll look at all the different issues that are there, but I want you guys to punch every single hole you possibly can. I know you already will. I just want you to try harder. So with that being said, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments and I will catch you all later. Peace.